Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining this morning. That was a very long litany of things that I've been involved in the mental health world. But what's not in there is why I got involved in mental health, and that's because I've struggled with depression off and on through my life. For me, the worst of it was during my high school years when suicide ideation was a regular part of my days. I was fortunate. Back then we didn't talk about mental health, but I was fortunate that I found the self-care techniques that worked for me. They actually also helped me perform better academically and in the other endeavors that I was pursuing. So the self-care techniques we're going to talk about, they have a performance value as well as a mental health value. There were some adults who said things that were helpful to me. The way some kids interacted with me, or some of my friends were helpful. And I've lived that long, healthy, productive life. I've had great opportunities. I've gotten to hike in great places around the world, which is my favorite self-care technique. And so I want to share that experience. I want young adults to know that there's hope. I had the good fortune, the district gave me the chance to speak to most of the students at Waubonsee Valley High School in the fall, and earlier or at the end of last year, to most of the older kids, the 7th and 8th grade kids at Scullin Middle School as well. Just to let them know that when we're in those pain moments, when we feel that there's no hope, that there is a way out, and you have to know how to get there. One of the reasons I put this picture up here is just to remind us that nature is really important to our mental health. A lot of neuroscience research has proven that we make better decisions, we think better when we're exposed to nature. So even viewing pictures of nature for 30 seconds allows us to make better decisions. So in this environment with the windows closed, not a lot of nature. And so that's one of the things that we've done. You know, we do it in some cases for safety reasons or energy efficiency reasons, but not having that exposure can be a real challenge. They did a great job in the keynote session of talking about how the world's different from when we grew up. Certainly when I grew up and from when you grew up as well. Sleep, that was discussed, but the average high school student sleeps 40 minutes less than the average high school student did just 10 years ago. Exercise, I'll get into some more on that. Nature. 2/3 of high school students spend less time outdoors than maximum security inmates. Most of the ones who are outdoors more are doing it as part of a structured sport. That outdoor exposure is really important. And the generations that are growing up now, elementary school kids, on average, are spending 7 minutes a week in unstructured outdoor play. They're not building the resilience that you build in that unstructured outdoor play. You know, when I was a kid, you know, I was one of 6 kids. There were some that were 10 and 12 years younger. Once breakfast was over, my mom didn't want to see us until dinner time, and she rang the dinner bell. But that meant we were outdoors. We were negotiating with the neighborhood kids over what games we were going to play. We were negotiating, if we were playing football, how hard we were going to tackle. We were finding which garden hoses we could drink out of. Which neighbors would let us use their restrooms, you know, and just figuring out what we were going to do. That meant we had to resolve conflicts. When the adults are always resolving those conflicts, the kids aren't building those skills. They're losing some of that resilience. One of the things that was mentioned was the sedentary behavior that young adults face. So just 1 extra hour of sedentary behavior increases the risk of depression by as much as 10.5%. Extra hour of light activity, and so when people talk about exercise being an important part of mental health, it's a critical piece. The endorphin release, just the movement, the progress towards some goals, just feeling better about ourselves. It doesn't have to be you're on a treadmill running, you know, a marathon. It's really about even mowing the lawn. And when I tell this to kids, that mowing the lawn or doing housework is good activity, that's good for you, they're like, oh, do your parents send us to talk about that? But just movement, getting out, taking a walk, going out playing, being outdoor engaged reduces their risks of depression. It hasn't been that long since teens used to spend time with each other. And one of the brain chemistries that helps us to feel good is oxytocin. We get that from social interaction. We get it from social interaction with each other, with people we love. We also get a little bit of it with our pet interaction. That's why pets are so important to mental health for many individuals. There's been a dramatic drop-off since social media came in and how much time kids are spending in person with each other. And this was only through 2017 data. Once we went into lockdown mode, they lost that connection. It's no wonder that girls particularly were harmed during 2021 in their mental health, because that social connection is really more important to be in person. Boys will often get it through engaging with each other and yelling at each other, playing on video games, or they were more likely to break restrictions and go outdoors and run around, play basketball or something with each other. But there's definitely an impact in terms of taking away those protective factors that help kids to feel good. And these things that help them to feel good give them the energy to focus academically or on their athletics or on their performances. So it's not just about helping them feel good from mental health, it's about giving them the capacity to perform at the best. Cyberbullying, another real issue. I got picked on as a kid. When I started high school, I was 4'11" and I weighed 98 pounds. You don't start high school at that size and not get picked on. But when I went home, I wasn't still hearing it. I wasn't getting picked on anymore. So I had a break. And that break was really important, the ability to recover between that time. Kids who are being cyberbullied don't get that separation. So when we talk to teens, we talk to them about the many things that affect their mental health. And I should point out, those first few slides were ones from some of my research. The rest are picked and chosen from different American Foundation for Suicide Prevention presentations. These next two are from the teen presentation that we do for high school students and for later in middle school. I always ask the high school students, do you think stress can be a good thing? And most of them know, yeah, it can. Because when you're stressed, you get a little boost of adrenaline, maybe norepinephrine, that gives you the energy to focus and really perform at a high level. But when that stress is too intense, or it lasts for too long, with that adrenaline comes another chemical called cortisol that's coating the fight, flight, or freeze part of your brain, the amygdala. And when that cortisol layer gets too thick, it literally prevents impulses from getting to your prefrontal cortex, where you can solve problems and think clearly. So somebody who's taking a test and knows the answer and can't think of it, it may be that they have to know, how do I clear that cortisol layer out? And having skills to de-stress is really important. Deep breathing exercises are a really important one. And when we talk to the students about it, you can do that anywhere. I sometimes have to do it when I'm driving on I-88 and somebody cuts me off, and my instinctive reaction is, oh, I'm going. I know that's not the right answer, so it's like, okay, just breathe slowly, calm yourself down, and let it go. But if you let your fight, flight, or freeze response dictate what you're doing, you're going to make some bad decisions. So stress, having the ability to de-stress, taking those moments. It's one of the reasons we know that the worst months for suicide loss and suicide attempt behavior for students are in October, April, January. When you ask educators, most of them think it's during the summer months in December. And we don't have great research on this, but what we do know from looking at the data is that the longer it is before the kids have a break, the more likely that there is to be suicidal related behavior. If they know that they're going to chance to recover soon, they can withstand it longer. Early in the week is a greater risk than later in the week for kids. So having that ability to de-stress, telling them to take a moment. And so besides deep breathing exercises, meditation, mindfulness, yoga, Yoga is really good. As a hiker and tennis player, I've had some foot injuries, so I've added yoga to my workout regimen. One of the things I've learned is that when you're in downward dog and the instructor's yelling at you to hold it, the only thing I can think of is don't hit your face, don't fall on your face. Everything else, whatever I was worried about, whatever I'm stressed about in the future goes away, that cortisol clears, and you get the chance to have access to the rest of your brain. Prayer that is focused on others, we know from research, is helpful and de-stressing. For me, taking walks in the woods, that nature exposure, it's almost meditative for me just to be out in that environment. So different things work for different people, but having that de-stressing is important. Diet, so we've got more than 100 different brain chemistries of which at least a half dozen are responsible for the different elements of feeling good. If you don't have the ingredients for those brain chemistries in your body, it's really hard to feel good. One of the reasons seasonal affective disorder is such a big issue in this area is we can't get vitamin D from the sunlight this time of year. I'm naturally vitamin D deficient. If I don't have enough vitamin D in my body, I can't produce serotonin. All of us can't without that. Most of the kids who get physicals, get them done in the summer, their vitamin D levels might be fine in the summer. This is a good time of year to test somebody's vitamin D levels, especially if they struggle during those winter months. But being outdoors, it's one of the reasons why being outdoors is so important for young adults. But overall, there are lots of different ingredients. Having a balanced diet, having access to the different fruits, vegetables, to omega-3s, there are a bunch of different components that are really important. When our kids are dealing with losses, they deal with losses, and they know, deaths, breakups of relationships, friendships that disintegrate, those are natural to happen as kids go through adolescence. And they feel like deep losses. Neuroscience tells us they feel things much more deeply than we would feel the same things. It's just the way that teen and preteen brain responds. They feel it much more deeply. Substance use, it's not unusual for people who are struggling to try to self-medicate. And the reality is, for an hour or two, they might feel better than they did the hours before. What they don't realize is, and what I didn't realize as a teen, was that, it might brought me a couple of hours of feeling okay, but then every other hour was worse. And it made it harder to have the energy and capacity to work on the things that led to long-term mental health. So we talk about that with them, and then really talk about the connection between physical and mental health. When we're struggling with our mental health, our body feels it. So, I'll ask them, how many of you, before a big test or a game or a performance, start to get a queasy stomach, maybe a little headache, start to feel a little body ache? And they know, they feel it. But they didn't realize that was because they're stressed and they're overwhelmed, or that their mental health is struggling. And when it gets really difficult, when I was really struggling in high school, it felt like I had a 4-ray vice grip around my chest. It felt like every day somebody was tightening that. I was walking around physically having trouble breathing. There was no physical reason for that. That was my body's way of dealing with the depression. It was my body saying, something's going on, you need to decompress and find some solution. So we have to understand those connections. We have to understand the role of inflammation on depression. There are lots of factors that we have to keep involved, but feeling like a burden can trigger a physical reaction. So if you feel like you're a burden to your family, and kids can think that they're a burden to their family very easily, and you know that they aren't. I know now that had I left the world in high school, that it would have been a deep trauma for the rest of my family. But at the time I thought, there's so many kids, we're struggling, I'm a nightmare for them, it would be better for them if I wasn't here. That was the way I was thinking about it. That's not the reality. But kids are living in what they're thinking, not what they would be able to see if they could see it through the parents' eyes. Okay. I'm not going to, some of this is a little bit old data, but I thought the data that we heard this morning is really critical. Most years, suicide is the second leading cause of death for ages 10 to 34. There have been some years where homicide deaths have been ahead of that, but it's generally the highest rate. What is the first cause of death for kids in that kind of 10 to 19-year-old age range? What do you think that is? It's all accidents, the combination of all accidents, which includes accidental overdoses. There's been a big surge in fentanyl deaths. They didn't talk about this morning. That is another risk factor beyond suicide of mental health issues, is kids trying to self-medicate using what they think is Xanax or Adderall or Percocet that they're buying off of Snapchat or WhatsApp, and it's got just a tiny little piece of dust of fentanyl in it, and it's enough to kill them. We lost 106,000 people to drug overdoses last year. 70,000 of those were fentanyl overdoses. Schools are now starting to pack Narcan or naloxone to have available to stop that opiate interaction and give them a chance to get to recovery. But it's a huge risk. And if you think that there's some risk in around keeping that Narcan in your purse, the county health departments all have training programs, can be a real savior. Back to the suicide risk, at the age of 11 or 12, boys and girls die by suicide at roughly the same rate. Once puberty hits, by the time they're 18, boys are dying by suicide at 4 to 5 times the rate that girls do. But girls attempt suicide 3 times as often as boys do. What's the difference? And actually, you had the answer earlier. Lethal means. Boys are more likely to choose a really violent method. One thing we know from research on attempt survivors is that many of them, almost the second they initiate the attempt, start to think, oh, maybe there was another way. But if you use a lethal method, there's no recovery. And it also provides more time for somebody else to discover the person and get them help. If they use something that's not as, firearms typically, the most violent of those methods. Years ago, there was the rate among youth, rates of suicide were highest with Native Americans and Alaskan Natives. Then there was a drop to the high level of white or Caucasian children, and then a big drop down to Asian American, Hispanic, and African American children. In the last several years, there's been a surge of deaths by suicide of Hispanic and African American 12 to 17-year-old girls and 6 to 11-year-old African American boys. So those rates are now, in many cases, at the same levels as the white Americans. There's still a little bit of a drop in Asian American deaths by suicide compared to the other populations, but unfortunately, we're seeing that they're all just converging up to the highest rates over time. For every death by suicide, so nationally, a little under 7,000 deaths of teens, there's about 100 to 200 suicide attempts. So it's not just the suicide deaths that we worry about, it's everybody who gets to the point where they're contemplating suicide, needing to get those resources. Very often, after a suicide attempt, that's when we start to get access to resources and support, or when it's clear. And for those parents who've had youth who attempted suicide, one of the other things we've learned from research is that there's a significant percentage of kids, maybe somewhere in the 25 to 40% of the people who attempt suicide who spent less than 10 minutes contemplating it before making the attempt. So when we say that there's warning signs, yeah, there might be if you put everything together and everybody knows what everybody else saw, but it's really hard to put it together until you get together and talk about it. So the latest data that they talked about this morning that's not in this presentation, 10% of high school students in 2021 made a suicide attempt. Nearly 25% contemplated it. Worse for girls than it was for boys, and really accelerated in 2021 for girls. But there's nobody who is immune and nobody who isn't suffering. I'm going to skip through that because we talked about that. Risk factors. Okay, out of the mental health disorders, one that often gets missed as particularly likely to lead to a suicide risk is eating disorders. I think we're just in Eating Disorder Awareness Week or just coming out of it. But it's one, eating disorders, because of what it does to the body and how that affects the mind, can be risky. All of these are risky, but that's one that people often don't realize, that eating disorder can be a challenge from a suicide risk. How do we distinguish between typical teenage behavior and something that we really need to be worried about? That's pretty hard. Because, I was a problem child, and my parents didn't know that suicide risk was an issue for me. I have siblings who were problem children. They didn't have that same risk, but could my parents have told the difference just from looking at us, in the interactions they had with us? It would have been really hard to do. The real key is, I forget the name of the guy from Linden Oaks that was speaking, Dr. Lauterhauser, was that his? Yeah. As he was talking about, is just to have that ongoing dialogue. So you have that chance to just pick, what's different? Is there a change here? Is there something I'm worried about? And that point about the gut instinct being good is absolutely right. If your gut tells you you should be concerned, be concerned. Okay, warning signs. Some of these are obvious. The being a burden to others is one that sometimes get missed. If it's, nobody would care if I wasn't there, it doesn't matter if I show up. Those are the kinds of things we have to be worried about, and we have to start asking questions about. That physical pain, really common in young adults to feel a physical pain when they're struggling. A sense of feeling trapped. One of the struggles that young adults are facing is they don't get to choose who they're with for big chunks of the day. They're in a class with some people who may not be people they want to be around. That can be really difficult, to have that sense of feeling trapped, like I can't get out of this. My bully's in the room and I can't get away from him or her. Behavioral warning signs, that isolation piece. Withdrawal's another one that's really important. Withdrawing from activities. Now, as you're going through middle school, high school, do kids change what they're interested in? Absolutely. So we're not worried if somebody decides, oh, I'm not going to play football, but I want to go out for the play. Awesome. But if they're withdrawing from everything, they're withdrawing from their friends, they're not wanting to be around you, and of course they want to spend less time with you, but if they're not enjoying the time and spending time with you when you get the chance, you want to notice that. Sleep issues, obviously, too little, too much is a big issue. There's a couple that are really important that get missed, that are real crisis signs. One is giving away prized possessions. One of the books I wrote was on the mother who helped found JKB, which operated at Neuqua Valley and some of the other Naperville schools for 25 years. It was she lost her 16-year-old son to suicide, and the program was founded to teach other teens how to notice when teens are struggling, because research has shown that 3/4 of the time that there's a sign, it's teens who see the sign. Do teens know what to do with those signs? No. But if you teach them, they can notice that. So giving away so when I was talking to Colleen, who is the founder of JKB, about her son, as I was preparing to write the book, she said there were no signs. But he gave away his Letterman's jacket the day before he died. He got in a fight with his best friend that he had never fought with the week before. Turned out they didn't know, but he was using steroids to get bigger for football, and that restricted his impulse control. So there were signs, we just didn't know what those signs were. But that giving away a prized possession, that's an immediate risk factor. Another one is really unusual goodbyes. So I did a youth mental health first aid training, and I do a lot of training with Trina back there from Linden Oaks. But this was not one I did with Trina, but it was down south of I-80. I'll just leave it there. And there was a mother there who had lost her 18-year-old son to suicide. And she was there because she had a 14-year-old and she wanted to protect him. And I talked about the unusual goodbyes. And she just broke down and had to leave the room. And I went in and checked on her, and she said, "I'll be okay, I just need some time." And when she came back in, she goes, "The night my son died, he gave me the biggest hug and told me how much he loved me. And then he did that to his brother." Sorry, I always see her face whenever I talk about this. She goes, "It was a couple hours later that I'm like, well, he doesn't do that." So if you ever see something that's like, that doesn't fit, my gut says that's not fit with this person, act on it immediately. Another more positive example, a young man who went to the JKB program, was captain of a sports team in one of the western suburban schools, got a call mid-season from a teammate saying, "Hey, I just wanted you to know you were a great captain, and I really appreciated your leadership." He's like, "Wait, it's the middle of season." He said that in past tense, and he's been struggling. He called that kid's parents, and they stopped a suicide attempt. They ran upstairs and stopped the attempt. It was those unusual goodbyes are a way of just bringing closure before they leave. In terms of warning signs for mood, they talked about several of these. One that I want to point out for those of you who have boys, we often think of rage and irritability as conduct issues, especially in males, but in some women as well. It can be a real strong sign of depression. And the rage and irritability, it's more likely to display in males and gets missed a lot of times. So often in school or in civil settings, we will treat the conduct disorder and not realize we also have to treat the underlying mental health condition. So that's a real key piece. How do you check in? You have to ask directly if they're thinking of killing themselves. When I was growing up, we were told, don't ever talk about suicide. You'll put the idea in somebody's head. There's been a lot of research done on that. We now know that is not the case, and in fact, the reverse is the case. Being asked directly if they're thinking of suicide or killing themselves reduces the risk of it happening. And why does it reduce it? Because it tells them somebody's paying attention. It offers the hope that there's care available. And so there's real positive benefits to having that. Help them reach out to a mental health provider. That can be an arduous task, especially with the overload that we have in a lot of places, 6-9 month waiting lists in a lot of places. If you're going to start with new care, if you can start that in December or in the summer months, you're more likely to find openings than you are during the school year. So if you are getting frustrated and you're calling in April and they're telling you 6 months, check back in early June, because it may be that things opened up. Ask how you can help is a real big deal. Just letting them know, hey, I care about you, I notice you, I want to help you. But there's 3 things we all need in life. We need people to notice us, we need people to care about us, and we need to be relied on. So teens also need to be relied on. They need to know that what they do matters. So they need to have that sense of purpose. They need the responsibilities around the house. Now, there may be times when they're just so overwhelmed, you have to take those away. But you also need them to know that, we count on you for this stuff. They need to feel that sense of reliance. One of the ways that a lot of young adults are finding that they're able to get that now is through volunteering. It's really powerful when you can do something for somebody that makes them feel good. It turns out that, from a neuroscience perspective, the person who helps usually feels better than the person who's getting helped. Everybody feels good, but the person who's doing the helping feels good about doing that. Now, I know a particular person who used to take her son on 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning and really struggle to get them to get going to go do that volunteering. But once there, all those positive feelings of, oh, this was valuable, came back. It's something that if I could go back, I would have done with our kids when they were in high school and pushed a lot more. How do you help them stay safe? Fostering positive connections. So one of the things that's really important for young adults is a lot of them have trouble talking to their parents. I certainly was never going to tell my parents about what I was struggling with. So who else might be out there? You know, in my case, it was somebody involved with a youth group who became an outlet for me, and the parents of a friend. But are there aunts or uncles? Is there an older cousin? Is there somebody else that you can help say, you know, please make sure you keep that tight relationship so they have multiple adults that they can feel they can turn to. Teachers, coaches in school counselors, there are lots of places where kids can get the help that they need. Really key piece, restricting access to lethal means. If you think they don't know where the medication is, if you have firearms, where the firearms are, they know because we ask them, and they all know, even though their parents will tell us they don't know, and they'll tell us exactly where it is under the closet and what sweater it's hiding under. So if you've got medications and you've got a kid who's struggling, keep it in a lockbox. Make sure that they can't get access to it. Helping teens cultivate problem-solving skills. One of the reasons I wrote the book about the JKB program is that it's really good. A big part of their program was helping kids learn to fail and then learning how to bounce back from that. Doing things that they're not going to be able to do right the first time, and then learning from that and figuring out how they can do better the next time. That resilience is really key. If they don't build it while they're at home, when they go away to their first job or go away to college, we see a lot of freshmen in college who have really, really difficult adjustments and a lot of loss that happens at that group because they're on their own. They don't have the helicopter snowplow parent fixing it for them. They're having to solve it, and they haven't built up those problem-solving skills. So letting them fail in increments they can handle and helping them understand, oh, you made a mistake? Okay, so what did you learn about how not to have that happen again? Maybe you learned I need to start studying 3 days sooner than I started studying. I didn't get a good grade. I didn't get what I thought I was going to get. Or maybe you need to make sure you get good night's sleep before the test, or prioritize, having just some downtime so that you have time to absorb what you're learning. But having that learning take place is really a critical piece. There are lots of barriers. There are some barriers that are cultural. We didn't believe in mental health when I was a kid. That just wasn't something we talked about. I didn't learn until decades later that at the time I was struggling, my grandmother attempted suicide multiple times. And my mom, when she finally told me when I was doing this work, I'm like, I've been doing this work. Why didn't you say something? She's like, well, we thought she wanted attention. And that's a common reaction that a lot of people is. And the reality is, what she was in so much pain, she didn't know how to get out of that pain. And she couldn't think of any other alternative. So, yeah, is one of the things that people would hope for is I don't have to be in that pain and I can get access to resources and I can learn how not to feel like this? Yeah, but it's not about the attention, it's about getting out of the pain. The belief that nothing can help. When somebody starts therapy, when a young adult starts therapy, if they go to that first therapist and they don't connect, they can feel like, oh, well, therapy is not going to work. It is really important to let them know you're not going to find the right therapist always the first time, every time. I know lots of people who are on their fourth, fifth, sixth person before they go, this is the aha person. This is the one who I can be honest with, who I can connect with. So as parents, while kids are going in therapy, you can ask them two really important questions. Are you able to be honest? Do you trust your therapist? You don't need to ask them what they're talking about. In fact, it's better that you don't. If they want to volunteer it, that's fine. But you do want to know, can I trust them? Can I be honest? Because if they're not able to be honest with their therapist, it's not the right therapist for them. There's a fear of what treatment might involve. One of the reasons kids tell us they won't disclose is because they're afraid they'll automatically be sent away, or that immediately go to inpatient when there might have been other approaches. And I know Linden Oaks and other places have a screening process because they know that that's not the right answer always. It can be the right answer, but it may not be. So don't insist on it if you've got a medical provider saying our outpatient program's more likely to be effective, or whatever the approach is. They're also embarrassed. Humiliation's a big thing, and that was mentioned this morning. When we used to get embarrassed, it went away after a couple of days. Now they've got that daily video reminder, or somebody's resending them something. Trina and I did teen mental health first aid training at a Lake County high school. And one of the young women who was there, as we were talking about panic attacks, said, yeah, I looked up from my panic attack to see I was surrounded by kids all recording it. So they have that fear that whatever their worst moment is, or what they think is their worst moment, that it's going to be captured, and they have to live with that forever. That's a real, so they also have that as a barrier in seeking treatment. If I go talk to somebody, and this was a barrier for me, if people know that I can't fix this on my own, then they know I'm weak. But think of it. Each of our brains has 86 billion neurons in it. Each one of those has 10,000 points of connection. There's more than 100 different chemicals that move information around and that determine whether we feel good or not. There's nothing more complex on this planet than the human brain. Nobody hesitates to get somebody to teach them to play 88 keys on a piano, but we're supposed to fix our brains without any help? Doesn't make sense. So when I'm talking to kids, I'll say, go get a brain coach, because that's really what therapy is all about, is just brain coaching. Now, you might have a chemical imbalance as well, that who can fix a genetic chemical imbalance, or one that's been caused by the traumas? A concussion can cause a chemical imbalance. So there are lots of other reasons to get that brain coach, people who have expertise that a young adult and us as adults is not going to have. Okay, I already talked about that. One of the things you can do for a teen who's struggling is ask them what you can do to help keep them safe, because they may have a method in mind that involves stuff you have in the home that you aren't thinking about that they would use that way. So make sure you ask them, what is it that I need to do, that I should do to keep you safe? They may also have a particular person who they feel unsafe around. So keeping them in environments where they don't have to have that exposure can be an issue. You want to ask about places that activate suicidal thoughts that you want to stay away from while they're in recovery. Especially if somebody's been hospitalized, that 90 days after they're released can be a real difficult time. So keeping away from being re-triggered by some of those challenges is really important during that time. And of course, talk to the school administration. Make sure that you engage your school support team so that they know what things are helpful, not helpful, and can be supportive of whatever your provider has told you would be helpful. Early identification and treatment is a big deal. I think of most mental health issues as just a downward spiral. So if you can catch it here, you miss all of this pain that's going here, and you can start getting it to a better place. You can make a big difference by catching them at an early stage and getting help early. Parents are also really important role models. So if you struggle and you go get help, or you talk openly about it, it's far more likely your kids will go get help and be open in talking about it. It's just they're looking for role models. What are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to handle this? So that behavior, how you talk about it, the words you use in talking with them make a difference in terms of is this somebody who's actually going to understand what I'm dealing with? Or are they going to just expect me to project how I'm supposed to project myself? It's also important as parents, parenting is stressful. It's overwhelming. Parents often do a really bad job of taking care of themselves. So you got to prioritize. Part of that being that role model is doing things to take care of you. So what are the couple of things that you do when you're feeling relaxed or good, feeling healthier? And make sure that you prioritize, get that as part of every week. You can get overloaded as you're helping your kids and working or keeping the home up or, taking care of a spouse or partner or parents, and just have nothing left for you. Well, eventually that depletion is going to show in how you interact with your young person. Talk to your kids in private. Big thing is, what's our natural instinct when we see our kids suffering? Fix it for them, right? We don't tell them how to fix it. One of my friends in Virginia, I spoke at a behavioral health conference in Virginia, and while we were down there, she was telling me that she and her husband had gone through a really difficult time period, because she would come back home from work and she'd start telling him about what had gone wrong during the day, and he'd immediately say, you need to do this and you need to do that, and then he'd just walk away because he wanted to fix it. So after a while of this not going well for either of them, they developed a language. So she would come home, and before she said anything about her day, they would say, is this a fix it or feel it? This is a feel it. And she'd tell him about her day, and he'd be like, I can't believe those ladies treated you like that, or that guy was such a jerk. And just really be empathetic. And she'd say, yeah, and sometimes a couple hours later, be like, okay, now it's a fix it. What did you want to tell me? But developing that language, well, it works with kids too. The person who's struggling from a mental health standpoint has to take ownership of getting better. So when we do our youth mental health first aid training, it's about providing hope with facts. It's about providing information and reassurance, not advice, not this is what you need to do. It's helping them learn, oh, here's what the consequences are if you choose this path, likely. Here's some other alternatives. What do you think you want to do? You know what the answer is, or what you think the answer is, but they have to decide what the answer is to take ownership of it and actually implement it. Also, reassuring them that help is available. A lot of kids are really reluctant to talk about what they're struggling with somebody they might have to see again. So as a starting point, one of the things that might be out there is the 988 helpline. You don't have to be in crisis. You might even be calling to say, I want to help this person, I don't know how to. They take that too. Kids are more likely to text, so you can text to 988, but having that conversation can be important. If you've got a young adult who's doing that, just let them know that since 988 went live in July, there's been a 70% surge in calls, so there sometimes are waiting times. It's not a sign from the world that you don't matter, but which is where the really hurting mind might possibly go. It's just that there's a lot of people who need help, and when they focus on you, they focus on you. So just be patient and stay with them until they get to that point. Okay. Trust your gut. That was talked about in the keynote session. That's really critical if your gut tells you something's wrong. And keep in mind, all of these things that you want to do to help them to feel better have that effect in terms of helping them perform better. And when we perform better, when we do better at school, when we do better in our whatever game we're in or in our creative endeavors, that also helps us to feel better. It creates that upward spiral. So mental health can be a downward spiral, but performance can create an upward spiral where as you do a little bit better, you make progress, you feel better. That gives you the energy to do a little better, and you build that capacity. Language, we heard this morning, one of the speakers using the term committed suicide. Our preference is to use died by suicide just because the term committed implies that they have clear ability and control of what's going on in their mind, and we know that that's just not the case. People who are struggling just aren't able to think clearly. I'll skip past that. Oh, I will mention non-suicidal self-injury, I think, is also an important part. It's a real challenge for people who are cutting themselves, burning themselves. Substance abuse is a form of non-suicidal self-injury. It's often a coping mechanism. One of the things that I would assume is if I saw somebody cutting, my gut instinct would be, you need to stop doing that. But science has told us that what we need to find you a better coping mechanism, because they're hurting themselves to create a pain that they can control rather than a pain that's even greater or a loss that's permanent. So it's really about replacing that coping mechanism with something that doesn't have potentially devastating consequences. Avoid minimizing their feelings. We might know that the guy that they were dating is a jerk anyway, so you're better off without him. But we don't want to minimize how they feel in that moment. We can say, oh, I can understand that they can feel awful. What can I do? Do you want to talk about it? We don't want to convince them that life was worth living, because in that moment they're just in pain and they just want the pain to go away. So really it's about focusing on how do we help you to feel better? How do we help that pain that you must be feeling to go away? And again, it says avoid advice to fix it. Have you ever felt so bad you had thoughts of suicide, is one way you could phrase it. Are you thinking of killing yourself? Are you thinking about suicide? You're not thinking about suicide, are you? Because if you ask it that way, they're going to say, you're not prepared for the answer. So you've got to ask directly. If you have to ask your child that question, you will be in a lot of pain and struggling as you are asking it. Hide that from them. Because most kids who struggle are really empathetic people, and if they're seeing that they're hurting you, they may just stop talking because they don't want to hurt you. They would rather inflict the pain on themselves than hurt you. So you have to hide it. You may need to then unwind and go cry in your room or whatever later, but don't let them see that in that moment. Let them know that however they feel is how they feel, but they don't have to feel how they feel. So let's figure out what can we do to change that. Staying calm, thanking them for having the courage to tell you. It is really hard to tell your parent when you're struggling. If they do that, or if you've got one of your kids' friends who comes to you because you're the person they feel comfortable talking to, make sure you acknowledge that's really brave and that's courageous. The other thing that I think is really important when dealing with young adults who are struggling is to constantly let them know what they're good at. We know from my workplace mental health research that well-performing organizations, employees will hear at least 3 positives for every negative that they hear. And in the really good performing ones, it's 6 to 1. There's some research that's showing that kids who are struggling are hearing 11 negatives for every positive. So being reminded, you're a really great artist, you're really a compassionate person, I hate to see you suffering, is a great way to start that conversation with, here's some of a couple of the positives that just to remind you, there's a lot of good there that you might not be able to see in this moment. Okay. Your child definitely is in crisis if there's a suicide note. Very often there are not suicide notes with young adults, but if there is one, if they're hearing voices, struggle with psychosis, which could either be schizophrenia, a form of bipolar disorder, but it can also be triggered by substance abuse. Eating disorders can trigger it. Severe dehydration can trigger it. And dehydration is another thing. A lot of kids need to drink more water. That actually helps the brain work better too. A lot of kids are in school trying to avoid having to go to the bathroom, and by the end of school, they're really dehydrated. Understanding how important hydration is it's an easy fix. It's not even that hard, but we don't really fix it very often. If your gut is, I'm afraid to leave my kid alone, there's a reason your gut's telling you that. Spend some time figuring out what that is. And there are a lot of kids who make attempts that are non-lethal. We know that kids, when they're making those non-lethal attempts, they meant them to die. They just didn't know how much it would take, or whether something would break, or, you know. So don't assume that that was just a way of getting attention. Assume that their intention was to get out of, permanently end their pain in that moment. 988 is way easier to remember than 800-273-8255. So just keep that in mind, 988. If you are just struggling with the question of, my kid or a neighbor's kid or a friend's kid is struggling with this and I don't know what to do, and I know we talked about this or I learned this somewhere, but I don't remember what it is, just call 988. They love having those kind of calls. One of our AFSP board members is a 988 professional, and she says those are my favorite calls, because you know you're helping somebody at an early stage before it becomes a crisis.